Hello and welcome to the Beach House 34 podcast. I'm your host, Christine Worth. A warm welcome to all the new subscribers and a huge thank you to all of our loyal listeners. We are continuing with the trial coverage of the Darlie Routier case and have just heard in the last episode the final witness for the prosecution, and that was Agent Brantley of the FBI. If you've been listening up to this point, you know that the defense team is getting a bit irritated with the judge over how often the state objects to their line of questioning and how often the judge sustains it, which leaves the defense with their hands tied in many instances. It's been an ongoing issue in this case, along with the defense team citing different Supreme Court cases and rules that pertain to the issues that they've run into while this case has gone on. And they've cited these legal citations. For instance, we often hear about the Daubert standard. Now, what this does is it ensures that any scientific evidence presented in court is based on real science and that it can be duplicated. This ensures that the jury only hears information that is, in essence, trustworthy. But each time that they've asked the judge to not allow a witness, for instance, Tom Bevel is a good example, the judge still allows the testimony. And as the case has gone on, this frustration has begun to show itself more and more. The state has rested its case, and it's now Darlie's defense team that begins with their set of witnesses. Now, today we'll hear from Sherry Moses and David Rogers. Sherry is Darlie's mom's sister, so in other words, Darlie's aunt. David Rogers is the pastor at Shepherd's Heart Fellowship Church in Mesquite, Texas, who officiated at the burial service for Devin and Damon. If you're interested, you can hear the entire Darlie Routier story, which was covered in episode number 33. From there, you can then listen to the trial coverage from the beginning, which started with Darlie's bond hearings. The entire trial is actually in its own playlist on YouTube, and I'll have all of these links available for you in the show notes. Finally, to keep up to date on the most recent happenings regarding Darlie and what's currently happening in her case, I encourage you to visit her sister Danelle's TikTok, which is incredibly informative about what's going on with the case, both now and in the past. And I'll have that link for you below as well. Lastly, before we get started, I would appreciate it if you would give this episode a thumbs up on YouTube and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on new episodes. I want to thank you so much for all the messages, the comments, and the support. You are all so appreciated. With all of that said, let's get to the first witness for the defense, Sherry Moses. The direct examination is being done by defense attorney Mr. Curtis Glover. Now, Sherry, tell the jury where you are from. I'm from Pennsylvania. Okay. What town? Roaring Spring. Okay. And you know Darlie Routier? Yes. How is it you know Darlie? She is my niece. I see. How is that relationship? I don't know what you mean. You're the sister of her mother. Is that right? Yes. What is her mother's name? Darlie Key. Okay. She is named for her mother. Is that right? Yes. Okay. What age difference between you and Darlie, if you know? I'm 40 and Darlie is 44. I'm not talking about this Darlie. Oh, Darlie. I call her Darlie Lynn. Okay. Why don't we call her Darlie Lynn? Okay. She is 27 and I am 40. Okay. And you live in Pennsylvania? What do you do there in Pennsylvania? I help with my husband's business. He has a flooring installation business and I homeschool my children. Okay. How many kiddos do you have? I have 2. Okay. Boys, girls? I have a daughter, 13, and a son, 7. Okay. You say you homeschool your children. That means you teach them at home? Is that right? Yes, I do. All right. Okay. Is Darlie Lynn originally from Pennsylvania? Yes, she is. Okay. Born there? Yes. Okay. In the same neighborhood where you live, that part of the country? Yes. Did you know her as a small child? Yes. Okay. Yes, I was there when she was born. Okay. And I assume that at some point in time she moved to Texas. Is that right? Yes. When would that have been, if you know? I think she was around 13. Okay. And where did she move to? Well, was it Lubbock or I'm not sure. They moved a couple different places. There was Lubbock and Beaumont at different times. Okay. Let's kind of come up to the present time, and I'll ask you if over the past year or so, you have had occasion to visit with Darlie both here as well as in Pennsylvania? Yes, I have. Okay. Tell us about any trip to Pennsylvania that she's made recently or in the past year or so. Okay. Her and Devin and Damon came up in March of 95. Had Drake been born at that time? No, she was pregnant with him at that time, but she didn't know it yet until she got home. Okay. And during that visit up there, did y'all get together and socialize? Yeah. Tell the jury about the two boys. What do you think about them at that time? They were just precious, happy little boys that were just a joy to be with. Okay. They were just happy because they loved and just ornery little boys. Okay. Tell the jury about Darlie's relationship with those little boys when you saw them there. Oh, she's just always such a gentle mother, always very patient with them and just so soft spoken with them. Even when they were ornery or something, she would just be so gentle with them. She never spanked them, just tell them to behave. Did she approach those boys in a responsible manner? Oh, yes, yes. Tell the jury about her demeanor, her behavior as she was there. Did you see anything unusual about her as she was there visiting in your home? And I think, what did you say, in March of 95? Yes, okay. These little boys were killed in June of 96. That would have been, what, approximately a year before that? Yes, okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you find anything unusual about her relationship with those little boys as they visited there in your home? No, nothing unusual. Just that she was a wonderful mother. Okay. I just thought her patience was incredible. Okay. Did you have an occasion then to visit with her again in November of 95? Yes, my daughter and I came down for Thanksgiving. Okay. You came to the Dallas area? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. And that would be your daughter. What is her name? Shanna. Shanna? Mm-hmm. Where did you stay at the time that you came in November of 95? Mostly I stayed with Darlie Key, my sister, but we had time that we stayed at Darlie Lynn's house too. Okay. If you would, tell the jury about Darlie Lynn's household and how things went there in her household when you visited there with her. Well, it was just a special, joyous time being together because we don't get to see each other that often. And just, did she make? Tell the jury what she did with her house on holiday periods. Oh, she always had her house beautiful. She loves beautiful things and she decorated it really nice and put a lot of effort into it. Did she, by virtue of the effort that you saw her exude there in your presence, by virtue of the way she decorated, did that look to you like a person who was down and out or depressed? No, not at all. Did she express anything to you that indicated to you that she was suffering from any kind of blues? No. Okay. No, not at all. I believe you told the jury it was a joyous time? Yes, it was, very. Okay. Did you then have occasion to come back when the little boys were killed? Yes. Okay. We came back. When did you hear about this? We heard just a little bit after it happened. Darlie Key called us on the phone. She called my sister, Luann, first. It was about 3:30 Dallas time, and she was just hysterical. And then my sister, Luann, called me, and we just couldn't believe that this had happened. And then I got a call from Darlie Key, And she was just so hysterical and just screaming and crying and just asking us to pray that she thought Darlie Lynn might die too. And it was just so unbelievable. It just happened. Okay. Did you all then pack up and come to Dallas? Yes, sir. We just waited until we could make the arrangements. We were on the phone all day between Darlie, and Darlie was trying to arrange for us to get airplane tickets transferred that Darlie Lynn had had. They had had tickets to come up to visit us. We were planning a 50th anniversary for my parents, and they changed the tickets over to our family so that we could come down. Okay, explain that to us. You say they were planning to come up to a family reunion there in Pennsylvania? Yes. When was that to have been? It was scheduled for June 15th. Okay. We had been planning since January of 96. And the little boys were killed on the 6th of June. Is that right? Yes. So just shortly after that, they were due, all of them, to go to Pennsylvania? Yes, they were due to come in on the 14th and had their tickets all ready to go? Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. They had Drake by then, did they not? Yes. Do you recall when Drake was born? Yes, October 18th, 1995. Okay. He was born then right before you came down for the Thanksgiving visit. Is that right? Yes, he was exactly a month old when we got there. Okay. So you had a chance to visit with the newborn with his mom? Yes. How was that? Just very special, like all babies, and we just enjoyed him a great deal. All of us. Was he special to her? Very special. Okay. All of her babies were special to her. Getting to the events around this awful thing in June, when did you have your occasion, first occasion, to see Darlie when you came to Dallas? Oh, we came to the hospital shortly after we flew into Dallas. It was a little before midnight on Friday that we got there, and we went into her hospital room. Okay. Who was with you? I went in with my sister Luann, and Darren was in the room, and Dana and her mother Darlie. Okay. Did you notice her condition as she was there in the hospital bed? Yes, I did. I sat on the bed with her. Okay. Describe what she was doing, if anything. She was sort of numb when we first got there, but when we started talking about what happened, she started crying and just in agony. Do you know a false cry from a real cry? Yes, I do. What kind of cry was this? It was a very deep cry. Did she have pictures of the boys there? I can't recall if she had them right there at that time. Okay. Did you have an occasion to see her injuries? Yes, I did. Describe those to the jury. Well, naturally, I looked at her neck first, but her arm was bandaged and the bandage was loose and she kept adjusting it and pulling it up. And I noticed bruising on her arm that was just covering her arm. Do you know a bruise when you see it? Yes, I do. You have lived some 40 odd years. You know a bruise when you see one? Yes. Was her arm bruised? Yes, it was. Any doubt in your mind about that? No doubt at all. Okay, I guess you had occasion then to go to the funeral and the viewing of these little boys? Yes, I did. Okay, I believe the viewing was on the 8th of June, is that right? Yes, yes. There were a lot of people there? Yes, a lot. Okay. Would you describe what you saw concerning Darlie at that time? Darlie Lynn? At the viewing? Yes. Well, she got there late. We had all been there a couple of hours before her because she was with the police at the time. Did she ever indicate to you that she was anything less than cooperative with the police? Not at all. I thought she was very cooperative. She just gave every information she could give. She just wanted to catch the man that did this. Did she tell you that? Yes, she did. Okay. The police then kept her for 2 hours, even through the viewing? Well, she was there for like 6 or 7 hours with the police that day. She was 2 hours late to the viewing. Okay. And how many people were at the viewing, if you know, approximately? There were probably several hundred. Okay. If you would you tell the jury whether or not you had occasion to see her arms there at this awful event? Yes, I did. Okay. She was wearing a short sleeve dress for the viewing, and it was very visible, and the bruising was getting really dark there. Did you have occasion to be around her when she was viewing these two children? Well, they took her in privately with the immediate family and closed the doors. And I was standing outside of the doors and I could hear her. I could hear her screaming when she saw her boys, and she was damning the person who did this to her babies. And it just tore our hearts out. We could feel her pain. Did you remain in the Dallas area for a time after this, Sherry? Yes, I did. We stayed for a week. Okay. Did you have occasion to go to a prayer service at the gravesite? Yes, we did. It was the afternoon before we left Dallas that we had the prayer service and the birthday celebration for Devin. Okay. Describe the prayer service. It was just, we had prepared to go. The children had made cards up and plaques and stuff, and they had gotten balloons and just wanted to make the day special to honor Devin because he was looking forward to his birthday so much. And they had already had so much prepared for it. And their birthdays were so special to them, and Darlie always made them special to them. And we were just gathered around and we wished him happy birthday and sang happy birthday to him, and we just held hands and prayed. Okay. I believe there was a prayer service actually before the birthday party. Is that right? Yes. This was sort of a birthday celebration for just the family that was leaving that day, that was flying back to Pennsylvania. And it was a little more private. And then she said she was going to have a celebration for the children to, she just thought it would be nice to just make it something joyous out of it, that because they had already been prepared for the party, that she just thought it would be something nice to do for Devin's friends. What did you think about that? I didn't think anything of it. I just thought that it was just Darlie Lynn's touch. That is the way she always did things. She always made everything special and beautiful for those boys. And it was just, to me, it was just a final tribute to Devin. Okay. Mr. Curtis Glover then says, pass the witness, and the cross-examination is begun by Mr. Greg Davis. Miss Moses, my name is Greg Davis. I don't believe we have had the opportunity to speak before, have we? No. Miss Moses, first of all, he then says, can I have a copy of her written statement, her notes that she has given you, please? Mr. Mulder of the defense says, we didn't take any statement from her. Mr. Davis says, okay. So I take it prior to your testifying today that you have talked with Mr. Glover about your testimony? Yes, I did. How about the other 4 attorneys over here? Have you spoken with them also? Preston Douglas was there. Okay. How many times have you met with them? Just once, briefly. Okay. Now, you have been in Kerrville since when? I'm trying to think. My mind is kind of, we got down here on the 11th. You got down here on January 11th, and since that date, where have you been staying? I have been staying at the Inn of the Hills. How many other of the Routier family are staying at the Inn of the Hills? My sister Darlie is there, and her daughters Dana and Danielle, my sister Luann, and my daughter Shayna. All right. And certainly you have had an opportunity to talk to them on a regular basis since the 11th, haven't you? Yes. Okay. Matter of fact, there are still members of the Routier family inside the courtroom today, aren't there? Yes. Okay. This second row back here to my left, are those members of the Routier family also? A few, not many. If I could, the young lady here, the blonde with the red sweater, you recognize her, don't you? Yes. Okay. The woman who has been taking notes throughout the trial? Yes. And who is that? Darren Routier's aunt. What is her name? Sandy. Okay. And certainly since the 11th, you have seen Sandy here in Kerrville, haven't you? Yes. And I guess she has told you she has been taking notes every day of the testimony, correct? Yes, I'm aware of that. Yeah. Okay. And Miss Moses, isn't it true that you are very much aware of just about every bit of testimony that has been given in this case up to this date? Well, I have known everything before this because I have kept in touch with my sister from the time this happened. Okay. My question, though, Miss Moses, was not what you knew before the trial began, but since the trial began. You have talked with the family, you all have discussed the testimony, and as a matter of fact, you have talked with Sandy, and she has been in this courtroom taking notes every day. So you know what's been going on in here, don't you? Pretty much. Yeah. Okay. Did any of these attorneys ever tell you about the rule of evidence where witnesses are not supposed to discuss what is going on in this courtroom? I have not talked to the attorneys until just briefly last night. So they didn't tell you that it would be improper for you to be talking with people who have been inside this courtroom discussing testimony. They never went over that with you? Not really, no. Certainly, it's very advantageous for you as a witness, isn't it? To know what's been going on outside of your presence. That helps you, doesn't it? Mr. Mulder says, Judge, there hasn't been anybody testifying what went on back in Pennsylvania here that I am aware of. Mr. Greg Davis says, is that an objection? The court says, well, is that an objection? Mr. Mulder says, yes, sir. The court says, okay, overruled. Go ahead. Mr. Greg Davis continues. So, you know what we have been hearing in here, and you know that there has been a lot of testimony about bruises to the right arm of Darlie Lynn Routier, don't you? Yes, I do. And, ma'am, just your own, when you came down here last year in June, I'm sure that when you saw those bruises, you made some comments to the nurses or doctors or someone in that hospital about them caring for those bruises that were so evident to you, didn't you? No, I did not, because I was at the hospital around midnight, and I was only there a few minutes. So that day, those bruises were not important enough for you to go up there to the nurse's desk and say, oh, listen, would you please come down here and look at these bruises because they are large enough. I'm concerned about them. You didn't do that day, did you? No, it's not my place to. And yet, some 7 months later, you are able to recall in great detail what those bruises look like? Yes, I am, because they were the worst bruises I have ever seen. The worst you have ever seen, and you never even told a nurse or a doctor about them or inquired about them, did you? They were just beginning the night that I saw her. Ma'am, could you please answer my question? Did you talk with medical personnel about the bruises, the worst you had ever seen in your life, while you were at Baylor Hospital? No, I did not, because they were not the worst I had seen at the time. Okay. Now, Miss Moses, when you talked with the defendant in this case, she described what happened to her, didn't she? Yes, she did. Okay. And what did she say happened to her that evening? Well, there's a lot she can't remember. She was in a lot of shock at the time, and there's still a lot she can't recall. Well, I'm just talking about the things that she could recall. Well, she just said that she had been sleeping downstairs with Devin and Damon, and that she woke up with Damon had nudged her awake. Okay. And she just saw this man leaving. And then she started to follow him, and she realized that the room she was in, the TV was on, and there was a little bit of light. But as she was getting further out into the kitchen near the utility room, it was darker, and she just stopped and thought, he could still be out there. I better not go any further. Okay. And she said she wasn't even aware that she was wounded until she had turned on the lights and she saw her boys. Okay. So as I understand what she told you, and that is what you have to go on because you weren't there that day, were you? No, I was not. Okay. And so according to what the defendant told you then, when she woke up, this man started to walk away from her. Is that right? Yes. Or was moving away. Yes. Right. So she wasn't, according to her story that she gave you anyway, this man did not attack her after she woke up and saw him, did she? She just had like a sensation of a struggle, but she had been in a deep sleep. Mm-hmm. And I don't think she is aware of what at all happened to her. Well, certainly she didn't see this intruder or this other person attack her two children after she saw the man, did she? We don't know if she saw that because there is so much she doesn't remember. I'm just going on the version that she gave you. In the version that she gave you, she does not have this intruder attacking her children after she sees the man, does she? No. And in the version that she gave you, she doesn't have the attacker attacking her after she sees the man either, does she? No. And he just simply leaves. She starts to follow, and then she stops and realizes that she has been injured, correct? Yes. Now, she did tell you, though, that she could recognize this man, didn't she? No, she didn't. She didn't tell you that? No, she just had a vague description of him, that she didn't see him very well. All right. You recognize this gentleman right back here in the front row, Mr. Basillo, don't you? Yes, I do. And do you recall that Mr. Basillo came to talk with you there in Pennsylvania, didn't he? Yes. And you were kind enough, was it on July the 4th? Yes. You were kind enough to sit down and talk with him for a little bit, weren't you? Mm-hmm. Okay. And isn't it true that when Mr. Basillo was talking with you, Miss Moses, that you told him that Darlie Lynn, the defendant in this case, had told you that she could identify the person that did this to her, didn't you? No, I did not say that. Were you at the hospital each day that the defendant was in Baylor? No, I just got there midnight Friday and she was released the next day. Okay, so you would not have been there the next day when Drake was brought in there to her and she refused to hold him? You were not there for that? No, I was not. Okay. I know that I have in my notes here that she came and visited you in March of 95. Yes. Then you and your family came down here in November of 95. Is that right? Yes, my daughter and I did. All right. When you came down here in November, things looked real good, didn't they, inside the house? You didn't see any problems or any troubles. Is that right? No, none. Wouldn't you agree with me, Miss Moses, that a lot of times families are going to keep their problems to themselves and they may not share that with people outside of the house? Not particularly with our family. We're a very close family and we share our problems. Okay. Just how quickly after she attempted in May did someone call you from that house to tell you that she had attempted? Mr. Mulder says, Judge, there was not any attempt. The court says, well, if she knows the answer, I'll let her answer it. Mr. Glover then says, he is assuming a fact, not an evidence, Judge, and we would object to it. The court says, I'll sustain the objection. Let's ask the next question. Mr. Greg Davis says, all right, well, I will ask it this way. The court says, rephrase your question. Mr. Greg Davis says, Miss Moses, when Mr. Basillo came and talked to you on July the 4th of last year, you and Mr. Basillo described this incident that occurred in May, didn't you? You know what I'm talking about, don't you? No. Well, you are aware of a journal, aren't you? I was aware a journal after it came out in the newspapers. You mean that, and that came out what, sometime in June? Probably, I don't know the date. Well, you weren't made aware of any journal entries by Miss Routier at the time, at or near the time that she made these journal entries? No. Okay. So that was something that she was keeping to herself? No. I do recall a mention of it while I was there in June, the week I stayed there with them. Mm-hmm. Well, did she tell you what the entry was? The last entry in that journal? No. She didn't share that with you? Not specifically. It was just people were talking about a journal or something. And, well, what did she share with you about that journal entry? We didn't talk one-on-one about the journal. So I guess the answer to the question would be she didn't share the contents of that journal with you. Is that right? No. So whatever the content is, either good or bad, I mean, she didn't go into that with you, did she? No. You said something that I noted here in your direct examination. She loved beautiful things. She did, didn't she? Yes, she did. There was a lot of money put into that house out there. Wasn't there? Yes, there was. A lot of beautiful things in there? Yes. At the viewing, Miss Moses, on June the 8th? Yes. Were you close enough to hear what words, if any, that the defendant uttered to the two deceased children in the casket? No. At the time I went in, it was when other people were coming in and she was talking to them. So if she said something softly to the two deceased children, you weren't in a position to hear that. Is that right? No. You told us about the birthday party on June the 14th. And have you seen the videotape of that? Yes, I have. Tell us about the birthday party that happened on June the 9th at Darlie Key's house. She didn't have a birthday party. There wasn't another party after the funeral on June the 9th? No. And would it be fair to say, Miss Moses, that your exposure to the defendant and her children was pretty limited? I mean, you live in Pennsylvania, so you got to see them when they came to Pennsylvania, and then you got to see them when you came down in November. Is that right? Yes. Would you agree with me that it's possible that the defendant behaved differently with her children when you weren't around her? No, I don't believe that. You don't think that is even possible? No, I don't, because I know her very well. So just no possibility that when you were up there in Pennsylvania, that this woman over here might just possibly treat her children just a little bit differently than you had seen her treat them. No. As I recall, your testimony was she was always very soft spoken with the kids. Is that right? Yes. Certainly, you wouldn't expect her to be yelling or cursing at her children. That would be very much out of character with what you saw during your visits with her. Is that right? Well, I never saw that. No. That would really surprise you, wouldn't it? Well, not really. We all have children, and we all tend to do that once in a while. Well, I'm just trying to understand. You say she is soft spoken. She is always soft spoken. Do you think maybe now, upon reflection, maybe that there is a possibility that maybe she does talk to them a little bit differently than you saw her talking to them? Not by very much at all. Mr. Greg Davis says, I'll pass the witness, Your Honor. Mr. Glover then says, nothing further, Judge. And the court says, you may step down, ma'am, and then says, your next witness. And next up on the stand is David Rogers, Pastor David Rogers. And the direct examination is begun by, again, one of the defense attorneys, Mr. Preston Douglas Jr. Mr. Rogers, would you tell the jury what you do for a living? And the court says, state your name and spell the last name for the court reporter. The witness says, I'm sorry. That's David Rogers, Rogers. I am the pastor of Shepherd's Heart Fellowship Church in Mesquite, Texas. And how long have you been the pastor there at that church in Mesquite? 10 and a half years. Before that time, had you been a pastor at another church? Yes, I pastored 3 other churches besides that. Where were they located? One near Mount Vernon, Texas, and 2 in the Tyler, Texas area. How many years total have you been in the ministry? In the pastorate, about 12 years, and in the ministry, about 20. Okay. Are you married? Yes, I am. Do you have children? Yes, I have 2. How many children do you have? 2. What are the children's ages? 15 and 7. Okay. How many years you been married? Almost 22. All right. Now, I want to direct your attention to June of 1996. I want to ask you if you were requested to take part and officiate the burial service for Damon and Devin. Yes, I was. Now, prior to that time, had you known Darlie Routier? No, I had not. Had you met Darren Routier? Yes, I had. Would you tell the members of the jury how you had met Darren? Darren's cousin is a good friend of mine and also a member of our church, and I had met Darren on 2 or 3 occasions at his cousin's home. So I guess the obvious is that Darren and Darlie were not members of your church. Is that right? That's correct. You had not been to their home or spent any time with them? No, I had not. And you had not met the children prior to that time? No, I had not. Okay. Now, when, to the best of your recollection, were you approached? Or, and I am talking about a date, about officiating with the funeral. Or let me back up. Was that the first time you were approached? Well, approached. How did you find out about what happened? Darren's cousin called me about 4 o'clock in the morning, 4 a.m., the morning of the murders, and told me of the murders and asked us to begin to pray for the family. We have a group of people at our church that pray for all kinds of needs. And so we contacted those people and we began to pray for the loss and the needs of the family. Okay. Obviously, at that time, you knew Darren, but you had not met Darlie? That's correct. Okay. And then what was the next contact you had with anybody about this matter? Well, I went to the hospital that morning. I guess I got to the hospital around 10 o'clock. I think it was, if I remember right. I visited with family members and prayed with them and just offered to help in any way we could. Okay. Did you talk to Darlie on that visit? No, I did not. Did you ever visit with Darlie Routier while she was in the hospital? No, I did not. All right. After you went to the hospital and you visited with the family, mhm, I'm assuming you spoke with Darren? Yes, I did. And did Darren pray with you on that day? Yes, we did. Now, for purposes of the jury understanding, there was a network of family support for Darlie and Darren at the hospital? Yes. Oh, yes. There was a tremendous amount of support. All right. And obviously, all of these people are deeply affected by what happened. Yes. And they were concerned for Darlie. Yes. And they were concerned for Darren. Is that right? Yes. Now, what, if you will, jump ahead a little bit. The next role that you took in this story is what day? Well, I think it was the following day, which I guess would have been on Friday. Darren's cousin called me and said Darren had asked him to contact me and see if I would be willing to preside at the funerals. Now, obviously, you agreed? Yes. And what after that? I visited the hospital again that day on Friday, again, met with family members, prayed with them, offered to help in any way we could. Would you go by yourself or with your wife, or how did that work? At the hospital, I went by myself. Mhm. And when was the first time that you met Darlie Routier? When the day Darlie was released from the hospital, which was on Saturday, the boys' bodies were prepared at the funeral home there in Rockwall, and we were waiting there for the police to bring her from the hospital to the funeral home for the viewing of the bodies. I was waiting in the back of the funeral home in the private family room entrance with her, Darren's cousin, and one of the funeral directors, one of the funeral home employees. The police officers brought them to the back of the funeral home and entered through the private entrance back there. And they came into the private family room, and that is the first time I met Darlie. Okay. And who was Darlie with at the time she arrived for the viewing? She was with her husband, Darren, and the two police officers from Rowlett. They introduced themselves to me as Detective Patterson and Frosh, or something like that. And did you get the impression that those detectives had been escorting her or shepherding her around or something? Well, I mean, they said they picked her up at the hospital and brought her there for the viewing, although there was a long delay because they had taken her by the police station. Evidently, there had been several hours of questioning, so we were there for quite a long time waiting. Do you have any idea that you could tell the jury about when you arrived at the funeral home on that day? It seems like to me that it was probably late afternoon, maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon, if I remember correctly. Now, is that when you arrived or when Darlie arrived? That is when I arrived, I think. Okay. I think Darlie arrived a couple of hours after I arrived. All right. If I remember correctly, I could have the times wrong, but I was there for a couple of hours before she was. That is the best you recollect? Yes. All right. If you would you walk the jury through what happened next? Well, the police officers pulled into the private entrance, and she and Darren got out of the back seat of the car, and we held the door open for them to come into the family room. And we stood there, Darren's cousin on one side of them and me on the other side. And we laid our hands on them and we prayed with them, prayed God's mercy upon them and his peace upon them and his healing, and just talked with them for a minute before they went in to view the boys' bodies and what they would see when they went in. Because we had already gone in and looked at the boys' bodies, and so we knew what they would see when they went in. All right, Mr. Rogers, over a period of your career, I believe you said some 20 years. Do you have any idea how many funerals or memorial services you may have taken part in during that time? Dozens and dozens. I couldn't tell you. Lots. And is it a regular part of your duties and your vocation to take part in funerals and officiate at funerals? Sure. Do you have any idea how many you may do in a month? Well, it's hard to say because the church that we're in now is a very small congregation. So I don't do as many now as I did several years ago when I was in a larger congregation. So I couldn't really give you a number. All right. Have you come into a number of people who were in the same situation that Darlie Routier was in losing a loved one or even a child? Yes. And are you familiar and have you come into contact with mothers who have lost children in tragic circumstances? Yes. Are you familiar and do you recall the way that those mothers responded to that tragic event and the type of grief and the display of emotion that they felt? Yes. Now I'm going to ask you a broad question first. I'm going to ask you, based upon your observations of people you have seen, mothers in these same situations, and based upon your observations of Darlie Routier, do you have an opinion that you can tell this jury as to whether you feel like Darlie Routier was grieving appropriately? Yes, she was grieving appropriately. Now, tell the jury what you saw in. I jumped ahead of myself a little bit from the time of the viewing to the funeral. And did you also go to the prayer service? Yes, I did. So you were actively involved with the family and with Darlie for a few days from the period of the viewing onward. Is that right? Yes, that's correct. Do you believe that you can tell the jury that it was not limited to a viewing and a funeral, but that you spent some time with Darlie? Yes, we did. Now, that has been laid out based upon the time that you spent with Darlie. What did you see? What did you observe? Well, I observed a mother who is grieving and heartbroken and anguishing over the loss of her children. Did she have periods that she would cry in your presence? Oh, sure. Now, there has been representations made that, oh, that maybe Darlie would just whine, or maybe Darlie would just kind of tear up, but they weren't real tears. Maybe that these were crocodile tears, that maybe it was kind of an inappropriate display of grief. Do you agree with that? No, I don't agree with that at all. She never whined in my presence. Her displays of grief appeared to be genuine and real. Did you see times that she smiled? Yes. Is that normal? Sure. In fact, Mr. Rogers, wouldn't it be abnormal for a person over a 3 or 4 day period that you see them to be hysterical the whole time? I don't see how anybody could be hysterical for that length of time. I don't know if this is the right word to use, but sometimes your emotions just simply play out, don't they? They do. Sometimes you just get to the point that you have to look for some stronger foothold. Isn't that right? Miss Sherry Wallace of the prosecution says, I'm going to object to leading. The court says, rephrase your question. Mr. Douglas goes ahead. In terms of a person smiling, do you consider that appropriate or inappropriate under those circumstances? Well, what happens in circumstances like that is a person cries, a person grieves, A person sometimes just sits and stares with almost no emotion. Sometimes someone mentions something sweet or a fond remembrance of their loved one that they have lost, and they smile or they even laugh. All of those things are appropriate and common in grieving situations. Is it correct that sometimes it's the memories that get you, though, isn't it? It is sometimes the memories. And in addition to that, faith gets you through. Now, did you go? Obviously, you officiated at the funeral, which is on the 10th. It was on a Sunday. I may have my date wrong. I think it was the 9th, but it was on Sunday. Right. The viewing was the 8th. Right. On a Saturday. That's right. All right. And during the funeral, did Darlie Routier appear to act appropriately in your eyes? Sure. She grieved and she cried and acted just like dozens of other people I have seen who have lost loved ones. And did you also take part and conduct a prayer service at gravesite for a few days after that? A few days after that, I didn't actually conduct it. I was there at it. Okay. There was another minister that Darlie's mom had asked to conduct it, but I was certainly there. And we prayed and we read scripture. And then we talked privately with the family and prayed with them. And it was a very meaningful and appropriate time. Now, did you know of your own knowledge at that time that there was a prayer service earlier in the afternoon and that there was also what had been called a birthday party that was planned later that day? I didn't know anything about that. I mean, I heard at the prayer service, Miss Wallace, again, of the prosecution, says, I'll object. I'm going to object to what he heard as hearsay. The court says, overruled. I'll let him testify. Go ahead. The witness then says, I mean, it seems like I heard some mention of that at the prayer service, but I don't know anything about it or didn't at the time. Well, let me ask you, if after a prayer service, the family gathered again and placed items of remembrance around the grave, some including the balloons with the children's name on it, and had a birthday party for a child that was very soon dead and was having his birthday, was scheduled, obviously, his birthday, right? They couldn't have the birthday, obviously, right? Does it strike you as abnormal that that type of event would take place? Miss Sherry Wallace again says, object to leading. The court says, let's rephrase our question. Mr. Douglas continues, does that strike you as abnormal, yes or no, whether that type of event as scheduled from your perspective? No, it didn't strike me as abnormal. Now, I want to ask you if at any time after coming in contact with Darlie Routier, if you noticed any bruising on her arm. Well, when she arrived at the funeral home on Saturday, that when the police brought her from the hospital to the funeral home, her right arm, was in a sling at that time. And of course, not having seen her before, the wounds were significant to see. And I believe it was Darren's cousin did help her adjust the sling when we were in the family room, and there was bruising on her arm. And that was on the right arm. Mm-hmm. And did that bruising seem significant to you? Well, it appeared significant to me. And that was on the 8th? Yes, on Saturday when she came. After she was escorted in by police officers? Yes, that's correct. I'm going to ask you perhaps one more question that was that is, would you agree or disagree with the statement that mothers who have lost their children, as a rule, are inconsolable? Mothers who have lost their children, as a rule, are inconsolable. Can they be consoled? Well, certainly they can be consoled. Mr. Douglas then says, pass the witness, Your Honor. And Miss Sherry Wallace of the prosecution does the cross examination. Mr. Rogers, how large is your congregation? We probably have about 80 to 100 people that come to our services often. Okay. And then you have another full-time job. Isn't that right? Yes, I do. What is that in? I sell computers and software and things like that. Who do you work for? I work for a company called Cheetah International. How long have you been with them? About a year. And your wife is working now a little bit for the defendant's husband, isn't she? She has done some work since the trial started to try to help him keep his business open, and a little bit this fall as well. Isn't that correct? Mhm. Now, I think the defense attorney brought out the fact that you had never even met the defendant before the boys were murdered, had you? No, I hadn't. Okay. So they weren't a member of your church? No. And I assume that there wasn't a pastor that they were familiar with because they had you do the service. Is that right? And that's correct. All right. And Randy Reagan is the husband's cousin that you were speaking of, that is a member of your congregation? Yes, that's correct. How many times had you met the defendant's husband before you did their funeral service for the boys? Well, are you talking about before the murders themselves? Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, before the murders themselves. Well, I believe it was 3 times, if I remember correctly. It might have been just 2, but 2 or 3 times at Randy's house. All right. Would you say that y'all were friends or were just acquaintances? No, just acquaintances. Okay. Now, since the murders, you've developed a very strong relationship with the defendant, haven't you? She needed pastoral ministry. That's correct. So, you developed a very strong relationship with the defendant, haven't you? And that's correct. In fact, I think by my count, you visited her when she was in jail in Dallas about 51 times. Is that right? Sound about right? Well, over the months, that's probably true. Okay. And then how many times did you come down to Kerrville when we were in jury selection back in the first or the latter part of October, beginning of November? One time. Okay. One time. Mm-hmm. And have you been to Kerrville other than for your testimony arriving? What? You arrived last night? Is that right? Yes, that's correct. Yesterday afternoon, we arrived. Were you here earlier in the trial? No, I have not been. And you want the truth out about this crime, don't you, Mr. Rogers? Certainly. Yes. Okay. You would want to cooperate in any investigation. Is that correct? Sure. In fact, you cooperated with the press in this case, haven't you? Well, I answered questions when asked questions. And you and the defendant's mother have met, had a specific meeting with an AP reporter. Isn't that correct? Mm-hmm. That's correct. And in fact, our office contacted you and you spoke over the phone to well, you first spoke over the phone and then later you met Miss Kinney, Anita Kinney, in your office. Yes, that's correct. And how that took place was Investigator Kinney called you several times and left messages, didn't she? I don't know that she called several times. I got a message and I returned her call. In fact, you didn't return her call. She had to call you. And when you finally answered the phone, that's when y'all got to visit. Isn't that right? No, that is incorrect. I returned her call several times. And when you came to our office, fair to say, you were reluctant to speak to Investigator Kinney, weren't you? I was apprehensive. Okay. And you said that you were concerned about talking with us because she should know there is nothing you could tell her because a minister counseling with people is privileged. Isn't that what you told her? That's correct. In fact, that is not true, is it, Mr. Rogers? In a criminal case, there is no such thing as a minister parishioner privilege, is there? Mr. Douglas says, I'll object to that. It calls for a legal conclusion on his part. He doesn't know that. I'll sustain the objection. Mr. Hagler then says, furthermore, Your Honor, Rule 505, there is a privilege. The court says, I'll sustain the objection. Miss Wallace then says, anyway, let's suffice it to say, Mr. Rogers, obviously, you weren't at the crime scene when these events occurred. That's correct. So all you know about what happened about this crime is what the defendant has told you? No, that is incorrect. There has been a lot in the newspapers and on the television about it. Okay. So you gathered your information from the press and you've gathered your information from the defendant. And I suppose you have spoken with the defendant's husband as well? Sure. Okay. And in that conversation you had with investigator Kinney in our office, do you remember her telling you that we wanted to be very careful not to overlook anything or anyone? Yes, I do. And you promised her if you had any further information, you would give her a call, didn't you? I did. And you haven't called her, have you? No, I haven't, because I haven't had any further information. Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about the viewing. hmm I think you testified that the defendant had been with the police for a number of hours. Is that right? I know we were there waiting for a couple of hours. And in fact, they had requested a police escort that day who had taken them and run them around town and done errands for them. Isn't that correct? That I don't know. Mr. Douglas says, "Objection, Your Honor. Only if he knows that can he answer it." The court says, "If you know the answer, answer it. If you don't, just say you don't know." I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Miss Wallace continues, "All right, no problem. When they did arrive there at the funeral home, the first people to see the casket included yourself, Randy Reagan, the defendant, her husband, two police detectives, and then there was a funeral director there as well. Is that correct? Are you talking about the first time that the defendant saw the casket? Is that what you are asking about? I am. Okay. The first time the defendant saw the casket, they went Randy Reagan and her husband, and she, the funeral director, and the two detectives went into the viewing room. And I didn't go in immediately with them. I went in about a minute or two later. Okay. So you didn't go in immediately. You didn't see what happened when she first went in? No, because we had gone out the little door and into the other door, and someone had said something to me, and I was drew your attention away. Stopped there for a minute or two. Yes. Okay. Now, when did you go into the viewing area there with the casket? Yes. About a minute or two later, you saw the defendant at that time, correct? Yes. And I could even hear her in the hallway before that, even. She was wailing, wailing loudly, right? Yes. And when you went, I suppose, you didn't see a tear, did you? Well, I mean, she was crying. You didn't see any water on her face or any tears, did you, Mr. Rogers? I saw sure, she was crying, there were tears. Well, was Randy Reagan in the same room? Right? So if he never saw a tear, Mr. Douglas then says, "Excuse me, Your Honor, Randy Reagan isn't here. It's hearsay, whatever he said he or saw." The court says, "I'll sustain the objection. Let's move on." Miss Wallace says, "Well, it's your testimony that she actually had tears at that time?" She had been crying when we were standing there in the family room. Yes, just about a minute or two before. Did you were aware that there were two pocket knives put in the casket with the boys, weren't you? I think there were. It seems like I remember that. Okay. And do you remember the first song played at the funeral? Yes, ma'am, I do. And what was that? I don't know the name of the song, but let me see if I can help you. Was it Gangster's Paradise? I think that was the name of the song. Now, Mr. Rogers, were you at this prayer service before the birthday party, silly string party? Yes, I was. And what? There were about 12 or 15 people there at the time? Something like that. Yeah. It was in the afternoon. Is that right? Yes, it was in the afternoon. And they had also invited a newspaper reporter to be present, had they not? Well, there was Mr. Douglas and says, "Your Honor, again, only if he knows what other people did can he answer." The court says, "Just a minute, sir. Wait. When they object, just stop." The witness says, "I'm sorry." The court says, "If you know the answer from your own knowledge, answer it. If you don't know it from your own knowledge, say so." "I apologize." The court says, "You don't have to apologize. Now then, we have what is called hearsay down here. Don't say what other people have told you, okay? And only answer questions from your own knowledge. If you don't know of your own knowledge, just say, 'I don't know.'" The witness says, "Yes, sir. Thank you." The court says, in the meantime, does any member of the jury desire a break? And the court says, all right, we have one. That's enough. We'll take a 10-minute break. Thank you. And after the 10-minute break, everybody's back in the courtroom and the questioning continues by Miss Sherry Wallace. Mr. Rogers, I think this is where I was. I'm not sure. At the prayer service the day of the birthday party. It was like a week, yes, about a week after the killing, the following Friday. Okay. Yeah, just over a week. You said you were there. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. And are you aware that there was a newspaper reporter there as well? Yes, I am aware of that. Okay. And after that service, did you the court then says, "Sir, could you please speak up a little bit louder so that the lady and gentleman right there in the corner can hear you?" The witness says, "Yes, sir." The court says, "Thank you." Miss Wallace continues, "It was a pretty emotional service, wasn't it? The prayer service?" "Yes." "Yes, ma'am, it was." And right after, the defendant and her mom spent about an hour with this newspaper reporter. Isn't that correct? Everybody was around talking, and they talked to him. I don't know how long. Did you leave before they did? I honestly don't know because I was talking to different people. Okay. You didn't conduct that service. I think that is what you said. Is that right? That's correct. Okay. What denomination are you, Mr. Rogers? We're independent. Okay. And I guess Baptist and independent kind of. So I'm Baptist. Don't let the Baptists hearing you saying independent. They don't take too kindly to that. Yes, well, there's all kinds of Baptists. So, what church were you pastoring before that? What church was I pastoring before this one? Mhm. I pastored a church called Tyland Baptist Church in Tyler, Tyland, in Tyler. How big is that church? That church at that time probably had 250 or 300 members, something like that. How long were you there? About 2.5 years. Did you do that full time? Was that church large enough to support that? A part of the time I did, and part of the time I didn't. Okay. What business did you have there in Tyler other than your pastoring? Well, at that time, I was working part time for Sears. In these, I don't know, in my count, and I guess it's now 52 times you visited with the defendant since she's been incarcerated. Hmm. Have you made any notes of those visits? No. Okay. Have you made any notes about what you have observed or anything prior to testifying today? No. You didn't write down what you remembered for the lawyers here? No. You knew that the bruises were important in this trial, didn't you? I have heard on the news that they talked about bruises. Hmm. Have you been made privy to the notes the family is taking here? Or have you just heard about this? I know that it's being done. I have not seen any of them. They told you what's going on? Sure. And I don't guess you knew that you weren't supposed to talk to them about the testimony, did you? Mr. Mosty says, Your Honor, we have been through this with the state's witnesses. Mr. Greg Davison says, I'm going to object here. Mr. Mosty says that until they are placed under this rule, Mr. Davis says, if we could just have an objection and no sidebars, please. If he has an objection, please state it. Mr. Mosty says, we have been through this. Mr. Davis says, again, if he will please state his objection. The court says, gentlemen, please. All right, go ahead, Mr. Mosty. Mr. Mosty then says, we have been through this very subject over the rule, and the court has already ruled that until someone is placed under the rule, that is not in play. The court says, yes, I understand that. If that will be an objection, then the court will sustain it. Mr. Mosty says, thank you. And may the district attorney please be instructed to quit asking those questions. And the court says, well, I think both sides understand what the rule is, and the people that are not under the rule are not subject to it. So both sides will just ask the questions and let's move along. Miss Wallace then continues. Mr. Rogers, anyway, you know what has been going on here in the courtroom, don't you? To some degree, yes. Okay. In all of these times that you have visited with the defendant, What has she told you about the offense? I can't tell you what she has told me about the offense. Mr. Mosty then says, may we approach the bench? And the court says, you may. Come on around here. And at this point, a discussion is held off of the record. So obviously, there's nothing in the testimony. And then when they're done, they go back on the record, and Miss Sherry Wallace continues with her questioning. Mr. Rogers, you testified just before the break, I think, that you felt like the defendant had grieved appropriately. Do you remember saying that? Yes. And you felt that the birthday party at the gravesite with the silly string was appropriate. Do you remember that? I remember that. Okay. Did you also feel like the pocket knives in the casket for two boys that had been stabbed was appropriate? It was not my decision. That is a family matter. And I have seen families put a lot. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Mr. Rogers, do you think that is appropriate? That is their decision. So you don't think it's appropriate? If it was appropriate for them, it was appropriate for that moment. Do you think it's appropriate to you? I'm not a pocket knife person, so I wouldn't have done that. No. So you think it's inappropriate. Is that correct? No, that is not what I said. You are not a pocket knife person? Right. What about the tarot cards in the casket? Do you think that is appropriate? I don't know anything about tarot cards. You don't know about those? No. When is the first time the defense attorneys talked to you about the bruises? The defense attorney last night asked me if I had seen any bruises. Is that the first time that anyone has asked you about the bruises? Yeah, the defense attorneys. No. Anybody? Nobody has asked me about bruises that I'm aware of. So you have not talked to anyone about bruises. Mr. Mulder says, Judge, he has made that fairly clear. The court says, I'll sustain the objection. Let's move on. Let's get to the next question in, please. Miss Wallace then continues. And you have testified that you knew bruises were important in this trial. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Miss Wallace then says, I'll pass the witness, and the redirect is done by Mr. Preston Douglas. Just one last question with respect to the song Gangster's Paradise. You knew that that was one of the children's favorite songs? Miss Wallace says, I'll object to leading. Mr. Douglas says, did you know? The court says, all right, thank you. If you know it from your own knowledge, just answer it. If you don't, just say so. The witness says, I was told by their father that it was. Mr. Douglas says, that's all. Thank you very much. The court says, thank you. Mr. Mosty says, Your Honor, I'm going to have to object to Mr. Davis. I have been holding but Mr. Davis has continued to make facial expressions at different times. I have been trying to hold that, but it's inappropriate. And the court says, kindly, both sides do not make any kind of facial expressions. Thank you. Mr. Mulder says, Judge, sometimes I just can't help it. The court says, I know that you can't, Mr. Mulder. I enjoy them when they are directed at me. Thank you very much. If you will step down, sir, good luck. All right, call the next witness, please. Okay. In this episode, we hear the first witness is Darlie's aunt, her Aunt Sherry. And we learned that in March of 1995, Darlie, along with Devin and Damon, went to Pennsylvania, where Darlie's originally from, to visit family. It's unknown if Darren was with them. At the time, she was newly pregnant with Drake, and Sherry mentioned how patient Darlie was with her boys. Around Thanksgiving of that same year, Sherry and her daughter then came to Dallas and stayed some of the time with Darlie Key, who was Darlie's mom. And here we discover that Darlie, at least in the family, is referred to as Darlie Lynn. She, meaning Sherry, mentions how Darlie's house was all decorated for Thanksgiving and what a great time they all had, how Darlie, she did not seem upset or depressed whatsoever. We learn from her that there had been a family reunion in the works since January of 1996, and it was to be a 50th anniversary for her parents, so in other words, Darlie Lynn's grandparents, and it was to take place on the 14th of June of 1996. Darlie Lynn, she had already purchased tickets to fly to Pennsylvania for this event. And we know that the crime took place on June the 6th of 1996, just days before Darlie was to leave for this reunion in Pennsylvania. Now, because she already had tickets, it was worked out that these tickets would then be transferred over to her family members in Pennsylvania so that they could then fly down to Dallas after this crime occurred. They arrived the Friday after the crime and went from the airport to the hospital where Darlie had been admitted. Now, Sherry was with her sister Luann, and the people at the hospital at the time were Darren, Darlie's sister Dana, and Darlie Key, Darlie's mother. They were all there in the hospital. When they asked Sherry about how is Darlie doing when she visited her, she referred to Darlie as being numb. And when they began to talk about what happened, Darlie would, she said, cry in agony. She also talked about the bruising on Darlie's arm. And we find out that the same day, the day of the viewing for the boys, now Darlie had been released from the hospital earlier that same day, and both her and Darren went to the police station to answer some questions. The viewing began later that afternoon, and the police finally brought Darren and Darlie by the funeral home 2 hours after the viewing had begun. When they arrived, according to Sherry, the immediate family was taken into the viewing room by themselves, and she was waiting outside the doors, and she could hear Darlie screaming and damning the person who did this to her children. The jury then gets introduced to the fact that before this silly string birthday party, there was a prayer service that was held at the gravesite. Now, when the prosecution starts to question Sherry, it's Mr. Davis, and he notes that a relative of Darren's is in the gallery there in the courtroom and has been there this whole time during the trial taking notes. He asks Sherry if she has talked to this person, and she says that she has. And Mr. Davis of the prosecution makes a big deal out of this because witnesses are not supposed to talk about what has been said in the courtroom prior to them testifying. But we will get a little bit into this a little bit later on towards the end of this summary. Davis then asks her why, when she saw these bruises on Darlie's arms in the hospital, why didn't she talk to the medical personnel? Which I think is a really weak question. I mean, she's in the hospital already. Certainly, the medical staff is aware of her bruising. So, what is the point of a relative who has literally just flown in to rush up to the nurse's station and start talking about her bruises? Plus, she says that she was only there for a few minutes, and this was all around midnight. He then has Sherry recount what Darlie told her about the attacks, and she said that Darlie told her that she could not see the man very well. She only had this very vague description. Yet Mr. Davis then infers that, hey, Darlie did recognize this man, but Sherry said, no, that is not what she was told by Darlie. So I don't know what Mr. Davis is trying to do here exactly. He then points out that an investigator named Busillo came to visit Sherry in Pennsylvania in July of 1996, and evidently Sherry, had said that Darlie told her that she knew who it was, but Sherry adamantly denies this. He then tries to get Sherry to talk about this journal entry that Darlie had made and how it may have contained information about her wanting to commit. But this is something that isn't in evidence, and so she wasn't allowed to directly answer it. But in the end, Sherry said that the only information she had about this journal, what had been reported in newspapers. Mr. Davis wondered if Sherry had heard what Darlie had said to the two boys when Darlie had walked up to their casket. She had not, but obviously Davis is trying to get the jury to believe that she may have said something terrible. At least this is the impression that I get. So next up was Pastor David Rogers, and he is questioned by, of the defense team, Preston Douglas Jr. This pastor is the one who presided over the children's funeral and attended the gravesite service. He also had been in to speak to Darlie dozens of times while she was in jail as this trial is going on. He happened to be a close friend of Darren's cousin, which is ultimately how he became involved in all of this. It began actually when Darren's cousin called Pastor Rogers at 4 o'clock one morning and told him about what had happened and asked that he please get in contact with the congregation to do prayers for the family. He talks about how the pastor was waiting in the private family viewing room at the funeral home, waiting for Darren and Darlie to arrive. We know by now that the police had kept them at the police department at least 2 hours past the time that the viewing at the funeral home was to begin. And according to the pastor, when they did arrive, it was, of course, Darren and Darlie, along with detectives Patterson and Frosh. Now, first off, personally, I think it's horrible and disrespectful that they didn't even allow the parents to show up on time to the children's viewing. And then to top it all off, it sounds as if they didn't just drop them off, they escorted them inside. Truly, this was none of their business. The pastor is then questioned about Darlie's demeanor and her grief, and he says it was very real. Throughout this whole trial, there has been constant talk about how people didn't see Darlie cry or seem upset. And truly, it's absolutely ridiculous. No one grieves the same way. The prosecution is painting the picture that from the time this happened, she should never at any time stopped crying, never been calm, should never smile for any reason, even if it was a memory of the boys that someone had mentioned. It's truly ridiculous. The pastor then talks about how he was there at the gravesite before the birthday celebration as they had their prayer service. And again, the bruising on Darlie's arm is brought up. And the pastor said that while she was at the funeral home, her arm was in a sling, but Darren's cousin helped her to adjust the sling at some point, and he did notice just how bad the bruising was. On cross-examination, we learned that the pastor's wife is helping Darren with his company so that the doors can essentially stay open while all of this is going on. And the prosecution then makes it sound like an investigator, as they're talking to this pastor, an investigator from their office, the prosecutor's office, tried several times to get in touch with the pastor, but he never returned their calls until evidently one time he just simply happen to answer the phone. He flat out said this was incorrect. And he did eventually meet with their investigator, this Kinney person, and admitted he was apprehensive because of the counseling that he had done with Darlie was privileged information. Now, this is objected to, and Rule 505 is mentioned. The reason this is objected to is because it's brought up that, because it's a crime, that no, he can go ahead and reveal this information. So this Rule 505, this is something that protects the confidential communication between a pastor and someone that they are counseling. The prosecution then moves on and asks the pastor if he knew that the police had taken Darren and Darlie around town to run errands before they showed up to the viewing. So I don't quite know where this is going. I'm sure we're going to find out. The pastor, of course, had no knowledge of any of this. And again, they bring up whether or not Darlie had water on her face as if she had been crying. The pastor said he did see her cry and he heard her wailing. This is just, I'm sorry, this is just so crazy to me. I guess if you're ever convicted of a crime and you're in the state of Texas, you better be damn sure that you're crying all the freaking time or no one will ever believe you. This is seriously what I'm getting out of this. And this is where we get to this thing that we talked about earlier. So in the testimony about a family member of Darren's who's in the gallery throughout this whole trial taking notes, and those who are testifying having heard about what was actually in these notes prior to them testifying. So it's again brought up to the pastor how, hey, didn't you know you weren't supposed to talk to anyone about these things? And this gets objected to because this rule is actually not in effect until someone has been placed under that rule. And this is also something that has occurred very, very early on with these state's witnesses. Almost the same exact thing happened. Suffice it to say, unless the witness had been placed under this rule, which they had not at this point, it is not in effect. Miss Wallace, who is doing the cross of the pastor, then tries to get the pastor to tell the court what Darlie has told him again. And he again says that he cannot do that. We learn that pocket knives were placed in the casket with the boys. The prosecution is making it out to be very inappropriate given how they passed away. But the pastor refuses to give his own opinion on this, stating that, look, this is a family decision. It is not for him to say what is right for the family to do. And this is then when there was also a discussion about what song was chosen to be played at the funeral, which just happened to be one of the boys' favorite songs. And the prosecution is making this out to be something that's totally not appropriate. But who's to say what is appropriate or not? If it was important to the boys, that's all that should matter. But I have a feeling that the prosecution is just not going to let this go. And they're going to try and use this to their advantage somehow. And then at the very, very end, there's kind of a little bit of a funny moment where there's objections about facial expressions and that's simply all it was. I found it kind of humorous, but nonetheless. That's it for today's episode. In the next episode, we move on to 3 witnesses for the defense, all of whom are friends of Darlie's. The first is Dana Godfrey. Then we have Kara Byford and then Julie Clark, and they'll all be in the next episode. Thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can get more trial testimony as soon as it's released. We will talk very, very soon. Bye for now.